The sound of boots scraping across the wooden floor echoed in the still air of the roadhouse in Des Moines.
8 men, tattooed, weathered, and hard-eyed, stood frozen, watching as sunlight poured through the open doorway, cutting across the room like a blade of fire.
In that golden light stood a small boy, no taller than the leader's belt buckle. His denim jacket was slightly oversized, his red hoodie bright against the shadows. He gripped a long wooden stick with trembling hands, holding it out like a sword. His chest rose and fell quickly, fear flickering behind his determined eyes. He didn't move, didn't blink. His voice cracked the silence when he spoke, soft but steady, like a child forcing bravery through his tears. "Tell me who my father is?"
The boy's name was Daniel, and for weeks he had been wandering the dusty highways of Wichita, asking questions nobody wanted to answer. His mother had passed away just a month earlier, sick, weak, and whispering secrets in her sleep.
Before she died, she'd ground his tiny hand and said, "If anything happens to me, find the Iron Vipers. One of them knows your father."
Those words haunted Daniel's dreams every night. The Iron Vipers weren't a myth. They were the toughest motorcycle club around, the kind that made grown men cross the street.
But to Daniel, they weren't monsters. They were his last chance at knowing the truth. He'd walked for miles to find them.
The stick in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a memory of his mother's broom handle, something familiar to hold when the world felt too big.
Now standing inside the Iron Vipers clubhouse, he was facing the men who could destroy him with a glance.
The leader, a broad-shouldered man named Stephen, stepped forward. His vest read, "Iron Vipers President," the white letters like scars against black leather.
His jaw tightened as he looked down at the boy. Something in the kid's eyes, something painfully familiar, made him freeze.
Daniel's voice wavered as he spoke again.
"She told me one of you knew my father. Please, I need to know."
The men behind Stephen exchanged uneasy glances. The giant of the group, a bald man named Joseph, folded his arms and muttered under his breath, "Kid, you're in the wrong place." But the boy didn't move. His stick lowered slightly, but his gaze didn't. Stephen sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What's your mother's name?" he asked gruffly.
"Charlotte,"
Daniel said quietly.
"Charlotte Reid." That name hit Stephen like a punch to the chest. The noise in the room faded, replaced by the pounding of his own heart.
Charlotte, wild, fearless, and free, had been the only person who ever saw something good in him.
She used to wait for him after every bar fight, patching up his knuckles and telling him he wasn't as bad as he thought. And then, one night, she disappeared.
He never saw her again. Stephen's hands began to tremble slightly as he looked at the boy's hair, his eyes the same shade of brown Charlotte had. He turned away, pretending to look at the wall. The men were watching him now, waiting. Daniel stepped forward, tears welling up, but refusing to fall.
"You all knew her, didn't you? She said, 'One of you was my father,'" he shouted. His voice echoed through the roadhouse, thin but full of hurt.
"So tell me who he is." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, in a voice softer than any of his brothers had ever heard, Stephen said, "She was the only person I ever loved." The room shifted. A couple of the bikers looked down. Stephen's throat tightened as he faced the boy again. "Daniel," he said, the name tasting like something sacred. "She left because she didn't want this life for you. She wanted you safe." Daniel's lips trembled. "Then why didn't you come for us?" His voice cracked this time. "She was sick. She died alone." That broke Stephen.
The man who'd spent decades building a reputation of iron and fire suddenly looked small, like the guilt he'd buried for years was clawing its way back to the surface.
He took a slow step toward the boy, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. "Because I didn't know," he whispered. "Charlotte never told me. I would have found you. I would have." He stopped himself. Words meant nothing now. The truth had arrived far too late. Daniel's stick dropped to the ground with a dull thud. He stood still, searching the man's face for a lie, for any hint of deception. But all he saw was a man who looked like the broken half of his own heart.
Stephen knelt down, bringing himself eye level with the boy. The sunlight behind him softened, wrapping them both in a warm glow.
"I can't undo what's been lost," he said. "But I can be here now, if you let me." The room was silent, except for the hum of the neon sign reading, "Open." The bikers, who once looked so untouchable, now stood quietly, humbled by the sight of their leader on his knees before a boy with a wooden stick.
Joseph stepped forward, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Kid," he said gruffly, "you've got guts. You just walked into the toughest roadhouse in the county with nothing but that stick." "I think you've got more of your old man in you than you know." A faint smile touched Daniel's lips for the first time.
Days passed. The Iron Vipers took Daniel in, not out of guilt, but out of something deeper, respect.
They gave him food, a bed, and stories about the woman who'd once tamed their wildest brother.
Stephen spent every day trying to make up for the years he lost, teaching Daniel how to ride a small dirt bike,
Fixing up an old helmet with a hand-painted symbol of wings, the same one Charlotte used to draw in her notebooks.
Slowly, the roadhouse that once echoed with the growl of engines began to echo with laughter.
But one night, as the sun dipped below the prairie and the bikes lined up outside gleamed in amber light, Stephen sat alone with Daniel on the steps.
"You know," he said quietly, "your mom used to tell me kindness was a kind of strength. I never understood that until today."
Daniel leaned against him, small but steady. "She was right," he said. "You just have to be brave enough to use it."
Stephen smiled faintly, his arm wrapping around the boy's shoulders as the sound of distant thunder rolled on the horizon. As the night deepened and the neon glow from the signage flickered softly against the paneled interiors, Stephen looked down at the boy resting against him.
The boy who had once stood trembling with a stick, demanding the truth. Now that same boy was his reason to keep going.
For the first time in years, Stephen felt something he thought he'd buried long ago. Peace.
Because sometimes the smallest voice in the darkest place carries the power to heal even the hardest of hearts.
If this story stirred something deep within you, if it reminded you that true strength isn't just about toughness, but about the profound courage to be vulnerable and kind,
then please like this video, subscribe to Third Person View, and share it with someone who needs to believe in the redemptive power of love and forgiveness.
Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter, stories that light up the path to healing.
Before we close, I want to ask you, what do you think is the most courageous act Stephen performed in this story, and what did Daniel's simple question ultimately teach him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you.